Captain Marcus Thompson stood at the edge of the training ground, his chest puffed out with pride as he watched the new recruits struggle through their morning drills. At 42 years old, Thompson had spent 20 years climbing the ranks of the Navy, and his reputation as a tough, no-nonsense leader preceded him wherever he went. His broad shoulders and commanding presence made even seasoned sailors take notice when he entered a room. The morning sun beat down on the naval base in San Diego as Thompson observed the latest group of hopefuls attempting to prove themselves worthy of serving under his command. Most of them were young men fresh out of basic training, eager to impress, but lacking the real experience that only came from years at sea. Thompson had seen thousands like them come and go, and he prided himself on being able to separate the wheat from the chaff within the first week. "Move it, move it!" Thompson barked at a recruit who was lagging behind during the obstacle course. "My grandmother could crawl faster than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. The other recruits chuckled nervously, knowing better than to slow down themselves. Thompson's harsh training methods were legendary, but they produced results. His units consistently ranked among the best in the fleet. As the morning wore on, Thompson noticed something unusual. Among the sweating, struggling recruits was a man who seemed different from the rest. This recruit moved with a quiet confidence that caught Thompson's attention. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested he had seen real combat before. The man's name tag read Rodriguez, and unlike the others, he wasn't breathing heavily despite completing every exercise with precise, economical movements. Thompson made a mental note to keep an eye on Rodriguez. In his experience, recruits who thought they were special usually needed to be brought down a peg or two. The captain believed in maintaining strict discipline and ensuring that every man under his command understood the chain of authority. He had built his career on being tougher than anyone else, and he wasn't about to let some quiet recruit challenge that reputation. During the lunch break, Thompson overheard some of the other recruits talking about Rodriguez. Apparently, the man had served in Afghanistan and Iraq before joining the Navy. Some whispered that he might have been special forces, but Rodriguez himself never spoke about his past. He kept to himself, ate his meals quietly, and responded to orders with a simple yes, sir, that somehow managed to sound respectful without being subservient. Thompson decided it was time to test this Rodriguez character. After lunch, he gathered all the recruits for hand-to-hand combat training. This was one of Thompson's favorite exercises because it allowed him to demonstrate his own fighting skills while teaching the recruits about real combat. At 6 feet tall and weighing 220 pounds of muscle, Thompson had never met a recruit he couldn't handle in the ring. "All right, listen up," Thompson shouted, his voice carrying across the training area. "Today we're going to learn about close quarters combat. In a real fight, your weapon might jam, you might run out of ammunition, or you might find yourself in a situation where you need to neutralize an enemy with your bare hands. The difference between going home to your families and becoming a casualty often comes down to who's tougher and who's better trained." He gestured toward the padded fighting area that had been set up in the center of the training ground. "I need a volunteer to help me demonstrate some basic defensive techniques. Someone who thinks they can handle themselves in a fight." Thompson's eyes swept over the group of recruits, deliberately avoiding Rodriguez at first. He wanted the man to volunteer to show some of that quiet confidence in front of the others. Most of the recruits looked down at their feet or found something else to focus on. They had all heard stories about Captain Thompson's fighting abilities, and none of them were eager to embarrass themselves in front of their peers. Thompson let the silence stretch out for a few moments, building tension. "Come on, gentlemen," Thompson said with a slight smirk. "Surely one of you has enough backbone to step up and help your captain demonstrate proper technique. What about you, Rodriguez?" Thompson finally called out the name he had been waiting to say. "You look like you might have some experience. Care to show these boys how it's done?" Rodriguez looked up from where he had been quietly adjusting his gear. For a moment, their eyes met across the training ground, and Thompson saw something flicker in the other man's expression. It wasn't fear or excitement, but rather a kind of careful assessment, as if Rodriguez was weighing something in his mind. "If that's what you need, sir," Rodriguez replied simply, his tone neutral and professional. He stepped forward without any of the bravado that Thompson had expected. There was no swagger in his walk, no attempt to show off for the other recruits. He simply moved to the center of the fighting area and waited. Thompson followed him into the ring, feeling confident and in control. This was his domain, his expertise. He had been in countless fights during his military career, both in training and in real combat situations. He knew how to read an opponent, how to use his size and strength advantage, and most importantly, how to end a fight quickly and decisively. The key to hand-to-hand combat, Thompson began, addressing the watching recruits while keeping his eyes on Rodriguez, is to strike first, strike hard, and in the fight before your opponent knows what hit him. Most fights are won in the first few seconds. If you can land a solid blow right away, you'll often find that your enemy doesn't have the will to continue. Thompson turned his attention fully to Rodriguez, who stood calmly with his hands at his sides. Now, Rodriguez here is going to play the part of an enemy combatant. I'm going to demonstrate how a single, well-placed strike can end a confrontation before it really begins. This is especially important when you're dealing with someone who might be trained in hand-to-hand combat themselves. Without further warning, Thompson launched himself forward, throwing a powerful right cross aimed directly at Rodriguez's jaw. It was the kind of punch that had ended dozens of fights over the years, thrown with the full weight of his body behind it. Thompson expected to see Rodriguez hit the ground, maybe a bit dazed, but hopefully not seriously injured. It would serve as an excellent lesson for the other recruits about the importance of being ready for anything. But something unexpected happened. Rodriguez moved. It wasn't a dramatic dodge or an obvious defensive maneuver. Instead, he made a subtle shift in his stance, tilting his head just enough to let Thompson's fist whistle past his ear. At the same time, Rodriguez's left hand came up in what looked like a casual gesture, but Thompson suddenly found his wrist caught in an iron grip. The next few seconds unfolded in a way that Thompson's mind couldn't quite process. He felt his balance shift, his feet leave the ground, and then he was looking up at the sky from a prone position on the training mat. The impact had knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment he couldn't quite understand what had happened. Rodriguez was already stepping back, his expression unchanged, his breathing still calm and controlled. He offered a hand to help Thompson to his feet, but the captain was too stunned and too proud to accept the assistance. Thompson rolled over and pushed himself up, his face burning with embarrassment and confusion. The training ground had gone completely silent. 40 recruits and several other officers who had been watching the demonstration stood in shocked silence as Captain Thompson dusted himself off and tried to regain his composure. In 20 years of military service, Thompson had never been handled so easily by anyone, let alone a recruit who was supposed to be under his command. Thompson's face burned red as he stood up, brushing the dust off his uniform. The silence around the training ground felt deafening, and he could sense the eyes of every recruit and officer watching him. His carefully cultivated image of invincibility had been shattered in mere seconds by a man he had dismissed as just another recruit. The embarrassment was unlike anything he had ever experienced in his military career. "Lucky move," Thompson muttered under his breath, loud enough for Rodriguez to hear, but quiet enough that the watching crowd couldn't make out the words. He needed to regain control of the situation immediately, or his authority would be undermined permanently. Thompson had seen what happened to officers who lost the respect of their men, and he wasn't about to let his career be derailed by one moment of unexpected failure. Rodriguez remained standing in the center of the training area, his posture relaxed, and his expression neutral. He hadn't celebrated his success or shown any sign of satisfaction at besting his commanding officer. If anything, he looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention the incident had drawn. "Should we continue with the demonstration, sir?" Rodriguez asked quietly, his tone respectful but not apologetic. Thompson felt his anger building. The recruit's calm demeanor only made the situation worse. It would have been easier to deal with if Rodriguez had shown some arrogance or pride in what he had accomplished. Instead, The man acted as if throwing a Navy captain to the ground was just a routine part of training. Thompson realized he needed to reassert his dominance immediately. "All right, everybody listen up," Thompson barked, his voice carrying across the training ground with renewed authority. "What you just witnessed was an example of what can happen when you underestimate an opponent. Rodriguez here managed to catch me off guard with an unexpected move. But in a real combat situation, that kind of lucky break won't save you if you're not prepared for what comes next." Thompson began circling Rodriguez like a predator stalking its prey. He had size and strength advantages, and he was determined to use them. "The problem with relying on surprise attacks," he continued, speaking to the recruits, but keeping his focus on Rodriguez, "is that they only work once. After that, your enemy knows what you're capable of, and they'll be ready for you." Without warning, Thompson launched another attack, this time going low and attempting to tackle Rodriguez around the waist. He figured that if he could get the smaller man to the ground, he could use his weight advantage to control the fight. Thompson had wrestled in high school and college, and he knew how to use his strength to overpower opponents who might be more technically skilled. But once again, Rodriguez seemed to anticipate the attack. As Thompson dove forward, Rodriguez sidestepped smoothly and used Thompson's own momentum against him. With a subtle hip movement and a perfectly timed push, Rodriguez sent Thompson tumbling across the training mat, where he came to rest in an undignified heap near the edge of the fighting area. This time, the watching recruits couldn't hide their amazement. Several gasps and whispered comments rippled through the crowd. Thompson heard one young sailor mutter something about ninja moves to his buddy, and the captain's humiliation deepened. He had gone from being the intimidating instructor to being the subject of his own lesson in unexpected ways. Thompson got to his feet more slowly this time, his body beginning to feel the impact of hitting the ground twice in quick succession. He was no longer a young man, and his pride was taking even more of a beating than his body. The other officers who had been watching the demonstration were trying to look anywhere except at their colleagues' obvious distress. "Impressive technique," Thompson said through gritted teeth, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. "It's clear that Rodriguez has had some advanced training. But let me show you recruits what happens when superior force meets technical skill." Thompson was getting desperate now, and he knew it. Every moment that passed without him regaining control made him look weaker in front of his men. This time, Thompson abandoned any pretense of instruction and simply charged at Rodriguez with everything he had. He threw a combination of punches designed to overwhelm his opponent through sheer aggression. Thompson's plan was to force Rodriguez into a purely defensive position and then use his size advantage to wear him down. Rodriguez moved like water, flowing around Thompson's attacks with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful to watch. Every punch that Thompson threw seemed to miss by inches, and somehow Rodriguez was always in the perfect position to counterattack. But instead of striking back aggressively, Rodriguez seemed content to simply neutralize Thompson's offense and maintain control of the engagement. After 30 seconds of futile attacking, Thompson found himself winded and frustrated. Rodriguez looked as fresh as when the demonstration had started, and his calm expression hadn't changed at all. It was becoming clear to everyone watching that the recruit was operating on a completely different level than his commanding officer. Thompson stepped back, breathing heavily, and tried to think of a way to salvage the situation. He couldn't keep attacking unsuccessfully without completely destroying his credibility. But he also couldn't simply end the demonstration without somehow proving that he was still the superior fighter. The reputation he had spent 20 years building was crumbling in front of his eyes. "You know what, Rodriguez," Thompson said, his voice carrying a note of forced respect. "You've obviously had some specialized training that most recruits haven't received. Why don't you tell these men about your background? I think they could benefit from hearing about your experience." It was a desperate attempt to redirect attention away from his own failures, but Thompson hoped that getting Rodriguez to talk would give him time to figure out his next move. He also found himself genuinely curious about who this man was and how he had acquired skills that were clearly beyond anything taught in standard military training. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the faces of the watching recruits before returning to Thompson. "I prefer not to discuss my previous service, sir," he said simply. "If it's all the same to you, maybe we could just continue with the regular training schedule." Thompson felt another surge of anger at Rodriguez's refusal to elaborate. The man was being respectful, but there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't intimidated by Thompson's rank or authority. It was as if Rodriguez was tolerating the captain's questions rather than answering them out of genuine respect. "I'm not asking for your life story, Rodriguez," Thompson said, his patience wearing thin. "But when someone demonstrates the kind of skills you've just shown, it's natural for people to be curious about where you learned them. Surely you can share something about your training background." Rodriguez looked directly at Thompson, and for the first time since the demonstration had started, there was something other than calm neutrality in his expression. It wasn't anger or disrespect, but rather a kind of tired recognition, as if he had been in similar situations before. "I was Navy SEAL Team 6 for 8 years, sir," Rodriguez said quietly. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq before requesting a transfer to regular Navy service. I'm here because I wanted a change of pace, not because I wanted to cause any problems for anyone." The revelation hit Thompson like a physical blow. Navy SEAL Team 6 was the most elite special operations unit in the entire military. These were the men who conducted the most dangerous and secretive missions, who trained constantly to be the deadliest warriors on the planet. Thompson suddenly understood why his own combat skills had seemed so inadequate by comparison. The watching recruits were equally stunned by this revelation. They had been expecting to see their tough captain demonstrate his fighting abilities against a regular recruit. Instead, they had witnessed a career Navy officer being systematically outclassed by one of the most highly trained soldiers in the world. Thompson felt his anger beginning to transform into something else entirely. The embarrassment was still there, but it was being replaced by a grudging respect and a growing realization that he had seriously misjudged the situation. Fighting a Navy SEAL and expecting to win had been like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except that Rodriguez had been polite enough to use only a fraction of his actual capabilities. The training ground remained eerily quiet as Thompson processed what Rodriguez had just revealed. Navy SEAL Team 6. The words echoed in his mind as he stood there, still breathing heavily from his failed attempts to assert dominance over someone who could have ended the fight in seconds if he had chosen to do so. Thompson realized that Rodriguez had been holding back dramatically, treating him with kid gloves while he had been throwing everything he had at the man. Looking at Rodriguez now, Thompson began to notice things he had missed before. The way the man stood suggested years of combat readiness, always balanced and prepared to move in any direction. His hands, while relaxed at his sides, were positioned where they could react instantly to any threat. Even his breathing remained controlled and steady, despite having just neutralized multiple aggressive attacks from a larger, stronger opponent. Team 6, Thompson repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew enough about special operations to understand what that meant. These weren't just elite soldiers, they were the elite of the elite. The men who got called when regular SEALs couldn't handle a mission. The operators who worked in complete secrecy, conducting missions that the public would never hear about. Rodriguez nodded simply, offering no additional details about his service record. "Yes, sir. But like I said, I'm here because I wanted something different. I'm not looking to cause any trouble or show off for anyone. I just want to do my job and serve alongside good people." Thompson felt a complex mix of emotions washing over him. His initial anger and embarrassment were giving way to curiosity and a kind of professional respect that he rarely felt for anyone. Here was a man who had probably seen more real combat than Thompson ever would, who had been trained to a level that few humans ever achieved, and he was standing there asking for nothing more than the chance to serve as a regular sailor. "Why?" Thompson asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why would someone with your background want to step down to regular Navy service? You could probably write your own ticket anywhere in the military. Special operations units would kill to have someone with your experience. So why are you here, taking orders from someone like me? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if he was remembering something from his past. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. 8 years of that kind of work changes you, sir. You see things, do things, lose people you care about. After a while, you start to question whether you're still the same person you were when you started. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I had a team, good men who trusted me to bring them home safe. We lost 2 of them on our last mission in Afghanistan. They died because I made a decision that put us in a bad position. I've been carrying that weight ever since, and I needed to step back from that world before it destroyed what was left of me. Thompson felt his perspective shifting dramatically. He had been so focused on his own ego and reputation that he had completely missed the deeper story standing in front of him. This wasn't some hotshot operator trying to show off his skills. This was a man dealing with the kind of trauma that came from years of life and death decisions, someone who was trying to find a way to continue serving while healing from wounds that went much deeper than anything physical. Rodriguez, Thompson said quietly, I owe you an apology. I misjudged the situation completely. I was so concerned about maintaining my authority that I didn't take the time to understand who I was dealing with. That was unprofessional of me, and I'm sorry. The watching recruits exchanged glances of surprise. They had never heard Captain Thompson apologize to anyone, let alone a recruit who had just embarrassed him in front of the entire unit. But Thompson knew that leadership sometimes meant admitting when you were wrong, especially when you were clearly outclassed by someone with superior experience and training. Rodriguez shook his head slightly. No apology necessary, sir. You were doing your job, testing a new recruit to see what he was made of. I understand that. I probably should have mentioned my background earlier, but I found that people sometimes treat you differently when they know about special operations experience. How so? Thompson asked, finding himself genuinely interested in Rodriguez's perspective. Some people get intimidated and act like they're afraid of you, Rodriguez explained. Others want to constantly test themselves against you, like they need to prove something. And some folks just assume you're automatically better than everyone else at everything, which isn't true. I wanted to be judged on my current performance, not my past achievements. Thompson nodded, beginning to understand Rodriguez's approach to his new assignment. The man wasn't trying to hide his background out of shame or false modesty. He was trying to integrate into a new environment without the baggage that came with his reputation. It was actually a mark of maturity and wisdom that Thompson found himself respecting. Well, Thompson said, turning to address the watching recruits, I think we've all learned something valuable today about making assumptions and the importance of respecting your fellow servicemen regardless of their background. Rodriguez has shown us that true professionalism means using appropriate force and maintaining control even when you have the capability to do much more. He looked back at Rodriguez, who was listening intently. The fact that you could have easily ended our demonstration in the first few seconds, but chose instead to neutralize my attacks without causing injury, shows the kind of discipline and restraint that we should all aspire to. That takes more skill than simply overpowering an opponent. Rodriguez seemed uncomfortable with the praise. I'm not looking to be anyone's example, sir. I just want to fit in and do good work with this unit. If there's anything specific you need me to help with during training, I'm happy to assist, but I prefer not to be put in the spotlight. Thompson recognized the wisdom in Rodriguez's request. The man was trying to rebuild his career and his sense of purpose, and that process would be more difficult if he was constantly being treated as some kind of celebrity or expert instructor. At the same time, Thompson realized that having someone with Rodriguez's experience and skills could be incredibly valuable for the unit if handled correctly. I understand your position, Rodriguez, Thompson said, but I hope you'll consider sharing some of your knowledge with these recruits when appropriate. Not as a show or demonstration, but as part of their education. These men are going to be deployed in dangerous situations, and anything you can teach them that might save their lives is worth sharing. Rodriguez considered this for a moment before nodding slowly. I can work with that, sir. Maybe we could set up some optional advanced training sessions for anyone who's interested. I could cover things like situational awareness, basic hand-to-hand combat, and some tactical movement techniques. Nothing classified, just practical skills that might be useful. Thompson felt a surge of enthusiasm at the suggestion. This could be exactly what his unit needed to distinguish itself from other Navy commands. Having access to real special operations expertise, even in an unofficial capacity, could make his sailors more effective and better prepared for whatever challenges they might face. That sounds excellent, Thompson said. We'll work out the details later, but I think that kind of supplemental training could benefit everyone. Thank you for being willing to share your experience. As the formal demonstration wound down and the recruits began to disperse, Thompson found himself looking at Rodriguez with new eyes. The man represented something that Thompson was beginning to realize he had been missing in his own career, a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve others rather than simply commanding them. Over the following weeks, Thompson found his entire approach to leadership being challenged and transformed by his interactions with Rodriguez. The former SEAL had quietly integrated into the unit, never seeking special treatment or recognition for his background, but his presence was felt in ways that went far beyond his individual performance. During the first optional training session that Rodriguez offered, Thompson was surprised to see nearly half of the recruits show up voluntarily. Word had spread quickly through the base about what had happened during the hand-to-hand combat demonstration, and many of the sailors were curious to learn from someone with genuine special operations experience. Rodriguez had set up the session in an unused corner of the training facility, away from the main activities. When Thompson arrived to observe, he found Rodriguez teaching basic situational awareness techniques to a group of attentive sailors. There was nothing flashy or dramatic about the instruction, just practical, life-saving knowledge being shared in a calm, methodical way. The key to staying alive in dangerous situations, Rodriguez was explaining to the group, isn't being the toughest guy in the room or having the fastest reflexes. It's about paying attention to your environment and recognizing potential threats before they become actual problems. Most people go through their daily lives in a kind of mental fog, not really aware of what's happening around them. Thompson watched as Rodriguez demonstrated simple techniques for scanning a room, identifying exit routes, and recognizing behavior patterns that might indicate hostile intent. The instruction was clear and practical, with none of the ego or showboating that Thompson had initially expected from someone with such an impressive background. What impressed Thompson most was how Rodriguez handled questions from the recruits. When someone asked about his combat experiences, Rodriguez would acknowledge the question respectfully, but redirect the conversation back to the training material. He managed to maintain his privacy while still sharing valuable knowledge, walking a careful line between being helpful and avoiding the spotlight. Has anyone here ever been in a situation where you felt like something was wrong, but couldn't put your finger on what it was? Rodriguez asked the group. Several hands went up, and he nodded approvingly. That's your subconscious mind picking up on details that your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. Learning to trust those instincts and act on them can save your life. After the session ended, Thompson approached Rodriguez as the recruits were filing out. That was excellent instruction, he said sincerely. You have a real gift for teaching. Have you ever considered a career in training or education? Rodriguez finished packing up his equipment before responding. Thank you, sir. I enjoyed it more than I expected to. In Team 6, we spent a lot of time training new operators, but it was always high-pressure, intense stuff. This feels different, more like sharing knowledge than testing people to see if they can handle the stress. Thompson nodded, beginning to understand more about Rodriguez's journey from elite special operations to regular Navy service. It must be quite an adjustment, going from that level of intensity to a more traditional military environment. Are you finding what you were looking for? I think so, Rodriguez replied thoughtfully. It's been good to remember why I joined the military in the first place. Sometimes when you're operating at that level, focused on missions and objectives, you lose sight of the bigger picture. Working with these recruits reminds me that we're all here to serve something larger than ourselves. Over the next several weeks, Thompson began incorporating some of Rodriguez's teaching methods into his own leadership style. He found himself paying more attention to the individual needs and backgrounds of his sailors, rather than treating them all as interchangeable parts in a military machine. The change didn't happen overnight, but gradually Thompson began to see improvements in unit morale and performance. The real test came during a surprise inspection visit from Admiral Patricia Hayes, the regional commander who oversaw Thompson's unit. Admiral Hayes was known for her exacting standards and her ability to spot problems that other officers missed. Thompson had been preparing for this inspection for months, knowing that his career advancement depended on making a good impression. On the day of the inspection, everything started smoothly. The Admiral toured the facilities, reviewed personnel files, and observed training exercises with her usual methodical attention to detail. Thompson felt confident that his unit would pass with flying colors, especially given the improvements he had seen in recent weeks. But then, Admiral Hayes decided to conduct an impromptu emergency response drill. Without warning, alarms began blaring throughout the base, and all personnel were required to respond to a simulated terrorist attack scenario. It was exactly the kind of unexpected test that could expose weaknesses in training and leadership. Thompson watched with growing pride as his sailors responded to the emergency with a level of calm professionalism that exceeded his expectations. The situational awareness training that Rodriguez had been providing was clearly paying off, as his men moved efficiently through the drill without the panic or confusion that often characterize surprise exercises. What really caught Admiral Hayes' attention was Rodriguez himself. During the drill, the former SEAL had naturally taken on a support role, helping coordinate response teams and providing tactical advice to other sailors without overstepping his position in the chain of command. He managed to be incredibly useful without undermining Thompson's authority, a delicate balance that impressed everyone who witnessed it. After the drill concluded successfully, Admiral Hayes requested a private meeting with Thompson to discuss his unit's performance. Thompson felt nervous as they sat down in his office, unsure whether the Admiral had been impressed or had identified problems that he had missed. "Captain Thompson," Admiral Hayes began, "I have to say that was one of the most professional emergency responses I've seen from a unit at this level. Your sailors showed excellent situational awareness, smooth coordination, and mature decision-making under pressure. What changes have you made to your training program?" Thompson felt a moment of pride, followed immediately by the recognition that much of the credit belonged to Rodriguez. He faced a choice between taking credit for improvements he hadn't directly created or acknowledging the contributions of his subordinate. The old Thompson might have chosen the former, but his recent experiences had taught him the value of honest leadership. "Thank you, Admiral. Much of the improvement comes from supplemental training that one of my sailors has been providing to the unit. Rodriguez is a former Navy SEAL who has been sharing advanced tactical knowledge with anyone interested in learning. His expertise has elevated everyone's performance." Admiral Hayes raised an eyebrow with interest. "Rodriguez? I'd like to meet this sailor. It's not often we see that kind of positive influence from someone at the recruit level." Thompson arranged for Rodriguez to join their meeting, and he watched nervously as the Admiral questioned the former SEAL about his background and current role. Rodriguez answered respectfully and honestly, explaining his transition from special operations and his desire to continue serving in a different capacity. "So you voluntarily stepped down from Team 6 to serve as a regular sailor under Captain Thompson's command?" Admiral Hayes asked, clearly intrigued by this unusual career move. "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied simply. "I needed a change after 8 years in special operations. Captain Thompson has given me the opportunity to contribute to this unit while finding a healthier balance in my service. I'm grateful for his leadership and support." Thompson felt a surge of warmth at Rodriguez's words. The man could have easily taken credit for the unit's improvements or highlighted Thompson's initial mistakes, but instead he chose to support his commanding officer publicly. It was a level of loyalty and professionalism that Thompson realized he was still learning to appreciate fully. 6 months after the training ground incident that had changed everything, Thompson sat in his office reviewing performance reports for his unit. The numbers told a remarkable story of transformation. Accident rates were down, training scores were up, and morale surveys showed the highest satisfaction levels Thompson had seen in his entire career. What had started as a humbling encounter with a recruit had evolved into something much more significant. Admiral Hayes had been so impressed with the unit's performance that she had recommended Thompson for promotion to Rear Admiral, an advancement that would put him in charge of multiple naval facilities. The irony wasn't lost on him that the greatest success of his career had come from learning to step back and allow others to contribute their expertise. Rodriguez knocked on the office door, entering when Thompson called out for him to come in. The former SEAL had been promoted to Petty Officer Second Class in recognition of his contributions to the unit, though he had initially resisted accepting any advancement in rank. It had taken Thompson considerable persuasion to convince him that the promotion was earned and necessary for him to be more effective in his training role. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Rodriguez asked, standing at attention in front of Thompson's desk. "Sit down, Rodriguez," Thompson said, gesturing to a chair. "I wanted to talk to you about something important. I've been offered a promotion to Rear Admiral, which means I'll be leaving this command in a few weeks. Admiral Hayes wants me to recommend someone to take over as the interim commanding officer while they search for my permanent replacement." Rodriguez listened quietly, his expression neutral as always. Thompson had learned to read the subtle signs of emotion in the former SEAL's face, and he could see curiosity mixed with concern about where the conversation was heading. "I know what you're thinking," Thompson continued. "You're probably wondering why I'm telling you this instead of discussing it with one of my senior officers. The truth is, Admiral Hayes specifically asked about your plans and whether you might be interested in accepting a commission as an officer. Apparently, word about your work here has reached some very high levels in the Navy command structure." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, I appreciate the consideration, but I'm not sure that's the right path for me. I left Special Operations because I needed to step away from high-pressure leadership roles. Taking on officer responsibilities would put me right back in the same kind of situation I was trying to get away from." Thompson nodded, having expected this response. "I understand your reluctance, and I'm not here to pressure you into anything you're not ready for. But I want you to consider something. The leadership you've shown here isn't the same as what you were doing in Team 6. You're not making life and death decisions for small teams in hostile territory. You're helping good people become better sailors, sharing knowledge that makes them safer and more effective." He leaned forward in his chair, speaking earnestly. "Rodriguez, you've taught me more about leadership in 6 months than I learned in the previous 20 years of my career. Not through lectures or formal instruction, but by showing me what it looks like when someone leads by example instead of by intimidation." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, considering Thompson's words. "What exactly would this officer position involve?" he asked finally. "You'd be commissioned as a lieutenant commander and given responsibility for advanced training programs across multiple naval facilities in this region," Thompson explained. "Essentially, you'd be developing and implementing the kind of supplemental training you've been doing here, but on a much larger scale. You'd have the resources and authority to really make a difference in how we prepare our sailors for deployment." The prospect seemed to intrigue Rodriguez, though he remained cautious. "And this would be a permanent assignment, not some stepping stone to other positions?" "That's entirely up to you," Thompson replied. "The Navy needs people who can bridge the gap between elite special operations knowledge and practical training for regular sailors. You've proven you can do that better than anyone I've ever met. Whether you stay in that role for 2 years or 20 years would be your choice." Rodriguez stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where Thompson had first tried to assert his dominance over the quiet recruit who had turned his world upside down. "You know, sir, when I first arrived here, I was pretty broken. I had lost faith in my ability to lead people without getting them hurt. Working with these recruits, seeing them grow and improve, has helped me remember that leadership doesn't always have to be about life and death decisions." Thompson joined him at the window, watching as current recruits ran through the same obstacle courses and training exercises that had been the backdrop for their first encounter. "I've learned something important from you too, Rodriguez. I spent 20 years thinking that being a strong leader meant being the toughest person in the room, someone who could physically and mentally dominate everyone around him. You showed me that real strength comes from knowing when not to use all the power you have available." Rodriguez turned back toward Thompson, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know what the strangest part is, sir? That day when you were trying to demonstrate fighting techniques, you could have seriously hurt me if you had connected with any of those punches. You're a lot stronger than people give you credit for. But you were so focused on proving your dominance that you telegraphed every attack and left yourself completely open to counters." Thompson laughed, remembering his own frustration and embarrassment from that day. "I was so concerned about maintaining my reputation that I forgot the most basic principles of combat. I put my ego ahead of tactics, and you made me pay for it. But gently, which I didn't appreciate at the time, but I'm grateful for now." "I never wanted to embarrass you, sir," Rodriguez said seriously. "I was just trying to neutralize the situation without anyone getting hurt. In special operations, we learned that the best fights are the ones that end quickly with minimum damage to all parties involved. Prolonged confrontations are dangerous for everyone." Thompson nodded, understanding now what he had missed completely during their original encounter. Rodriguez hadn't been showing off or trying to humiliate his commanding officer. He had been applying his training to defuse a potentially harmful situation as efficiently as possible. The fact that Thompson's ego had been bruised in the process was an unfortunate but secondary consideration. "So what do you think about the commission offer?" Thompson asked, returning to the main topic of their conversation. Rodriguez was quiet for another moment before responding. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I have one condition. I want to be able to continue working directly with recruits and junior sailors. I don't want to get so caught up in administrative responsibilities that I lose touch with the people we're actually trying to help." Thompson smiled, recognizing the wisdom in Rodriguez's condition. "I think that could be arranged. In fact, Admiral Hayes specifically mentioned that she wanted someone who would maintain hands-on involvement with training rather than just pushing papers around an office." As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Thompson reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had started as a simple training demonstration had evolved into a fundamental transformation of his understanding of leadership, authority, and the true meaning of strength. He had learned that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected sources, and that wisdom often wears the quiet disguise of humility. Rodriguez would go on to revolutionize training programs throughout the naval region, developing methods that combined elite tactical knowledge with practical application for regular sailors. His approach emphasized situational awareness, team coordination, and adaptive thinking rather than just physical toughness or aggressive tactics. Thompson's promotion to Rear Admiral marked the beginning of a distinguished career focused on developing leaders who understood the difference between commanding respect and demanding it. He often told the story of his encounter with Rodriguez to other officers, not as an embarrassing anecdote, but as an example of how much you could learn when you were willing to admit that someone else might know more than you did. The training ground where their first encounter had taken place became something of a legend at the naval base. New recruits would often ask to see the spot where a Navy SEAL had thrown a captain to the ground, and instructors would use the incident to teach lessons about humility, respect, and the importance of never underestimating the people around you. But for Thompson and Rodriguez, the real lesson had nothing to do with fighting techniques or military tactics. They had learned that true strength comes not from the ability to defeat others, but from the wisdom to know when victory isn't the point. In a world that often celebrated dominance and aggression, they had discovered the quiet power of restraint, respect, and the willingness to learn from anyone who had something valuable to teach. Years later, when asked about the most important moment in his military career, Thompson would always point to that day on the training ground when he learned that one blow was never enough when delivered by pride, but that one lesson in humility could change everything.